It is now my great pleasure to step down from this pulpit and join all of you in receiving today's message. Shirley McBride has graciously asked, and we picked a date for her to preach, and today is the day, folks. So I would like to invite her forward for today's message. Thank you, Shirley.
Good morning. I would like, first of all, to have you pray with me for the Lord to speak as he should through me to you. If you would just join me in that thought. When I was talking to the pastor about this and about what I would like to do and what the word should be, I started, of course, with the scriptures that you have already heard. And one of the things that I immediately started to think about was how lucky I am, how blessed my life has been, how much more it ever turned out to be than I could have ever anticipated. And when I looked at the scriptures, I noticed there was somewhat of a thankfulness there too. For example, in the Judges section that was read to you, Deborah, a woman, was able to help the Israelites conquer the people that were giving them trouble. And the Lord was there when he was needed. How joyous that was for the Israelites. In the Psalms, there is a reference to the victory that the Lord provides for us. Certainly he gives us challenges, but he also gives us victory. And finally, in Thessalonicus, to make sure that we actually do have a shot, he gave us the best of all. He gave us his Son. What more could we have but the presence of the Lord with us? What I started thinking about to begin with is I am very blessed, and one of the blessings that I have is friends, in particular one that got me started in this whole path indirectly. When I was in 5th grade, Mrs. McConaughey had a friend who was teaching in Germany, which at that time, I must say, was not too long after the end of the Second World War. This was the divided Germany. And this woman was teaching a group of German children who were interested in corresponding with Americans. And my teacher had a whole group of names that were sent to her, and we exchanged names. We got these names, and I started to write to Gisela Rosenfeld, who was a German girl about perhaps 2 years older than I. I have continued to write to her ever since. There was one period when I was in high school where I got a little bit lazy, I guess, and I didn't write for a long time, and then I didn't hear from her, and I thought, oh, wow. So I wrote a letter, and she didn't answer. And I wrote another, and I was very contrite, and I said, I really am sorry. It's my fault. If you don't want to correspond any longer, I will understand, and I won't write again. And she wrote. And so we have been together through all these years. My friend, my cousin in Houston, when I said I've been writing to Gisela now for 60 years, he said to me, now you know how old I am. He said to me, I don't think I've known anybody for 60 years. It's been wonderful. It's been a discussion of all sorts of things, what we think and what they think is going on and so forth. And just recently I received another letter from her, and that's what made me get onto this to begin with. Her letters are long in German script, usually on onion skin paper, and she is writing to me in English, so that she has a rough time, bless her heart, because it is very difficult for her to do that. And there are words like, for example, the word for old. She talks about ancient people. She doesn't realize that ancient usually doesn't apply to people. And so you have to interpret a little bit, and it's hard to answer her back, but it's one of the blessings that I have, and that got me started on this whole thing. You may remember, for example, many years ago, there was a song that came out in a rather unusual place. It was written by Irving Berlin, and it was in a Christmas story. Bing Crosby sang it, and it was called Count Your Blessings. So it was all part of this same thing. And I looked this up so I could get a start with this. The words were, as you may remember, when I'm worried and I can't sleep, I count my blessings instead of sheep, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. When my bankroll is getting small, I think of when I had none at all, and I fall asleep counting my blessings. I think about a nursery and I picture curly heads, and one by one I count them as they slumber in their beds. If you're worried and you can't sleep, just count your blessings instead of sheep, and you'll fall asleep counting your blessings. So I started counting blessings, and I thought maybe if I do some of that, it may help all of us do that. Certainly there are many times when blessings seem far away. But here are some that I came up with. For example, first one that I would think about would be friends, relatives, that sort of thing. Now, certainly all of our relatives are not wonderful. I have a lot of relatives. My parents were both one of 6 children, and my relatives are not very close, really. The one in Houston that I mentioned, I had not seen until I moved down there. He had lived down there for a long time. I have 2 sets of relatives that are kind of interesting. My father was older, and so I have very few cousins left on that side. In fact, there's me and one other, and she is 90-something. I never really knew her because, as I said to her, when I first met her, she was married and I was 10 years old, or something like that. So we didn't have much in common, and she lived in Detroit, so I never saw her. Recently, I discovered that she lives near Jerry's brother. So when we go to see Jerry's brother, I get to see Betty. And she did say to me once, "Why is it you're so much younger than I am?" She was actually a wave in World War II. And I said, "Well, you got to understand, my dad was 45 years old when I was born, so that makes a difference." But what a great joy it is to get to know her. The only other person I'm very close to is a second cousin, and I had a very interesting experience with her recently. Her husband was not well, and she was bringing him to Phillipsburg for treatment. And she would have to wait 2 hours. She lives in Bartonsville, which is up in the Poconos. And she said to me one time, she called and said, "Could we have lunch together?" And we're sitting there and we're talking, and I'm thinking, this is really odd because she is older than I am, but she's a second cousin. And I remember her grandfather as my uncle. So we're all on a different plane. Now, on the other side, I'm the oldest grandchild, so everybody else is younger. And yet, I'm very blessed with them, and even more, I'm very blessed with friends. And I'm sure as I'm saying this, you can start thinking about some of the friends, some of the relatives who have given you so much. For example, this Wednesday, I drove over to northern Jersey and had lunch with several women that I met when I started to teach in Parsippany a long time ago. What a blessing to see them. The next on my list, healing, health. Now, we all deal with this. I know my friends from that luncheon, last time one of my friends said, "You know, the first 10 years of retirement are wonderful, and then after that, it's all downhill." She's the one with the 2 knees that have been replaced, and when I saw her this time, she had tripped and had a nice black and blue mark where she hit a railing. So it becomes more challenging as we get better or older, but being healthy is a great blessing. And also I find that I learn when I'm not healthy. One of the times of great education for me was when the time I tried to fly in the front of the Asbury Church and discovered it was impossible. I was standing on the end of a step and I forgot that was the end of the step, and I stepped to the left and I went through a whole bit of learning what people go through who use walkers and footed canes. And that was an interesting experience too, because like we went to New York, we had tickets for shows, and we thought, well, we'll try, we'll go. And Jerry, bless him, figured out where we could park close to the show. The Lord was with me. We had a restaurant right handy, and it had a downstairs bathroom. Do you know how unusual that is in New York? And then we went over to the theater. They looked at my walker and said, oh, there's an elevator over there. We got upstairs. There were people waiting to go in. Of course, they got up and gave me a seat. And when we got in, I didn't have a program. A woman ahead of me said, I'll get you one. When we got done, we left early and got down. And the other interesting thing is we couldn't get into the garage Jerry planned on. We wound up going down a garage to park, down into the basement. I thought, uh-oh. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to climb the stairs, I guess. And the people down there said, there's an elevator over there. And we went in and found the elevator. The doorman opened the door to let me out. There are so many examples like this in your lives where you find these things. And it also gave me a real new notice of things like if I walk somewhere, like I did recently on a carpet at the top of the stairs, and there was a lump there, and I thought, not good. So I went and told somebody about it. I see things I never saw before. I noticed that why do many churches have marble fronts that want to kill you if you're not careful? So it's a whole new view when you aren't healthy. And sometimes even in that, for some reason, this silly thing comes up too. My aunt was very ill in the hospital, and I was visiting her with my cousin, and they brought her lunch. And Judy looked at the lunch and said, oh, that looks good. And the young man who delivered it said, I wouldn't lie to my mother. So, health, you can learn even when it's not good. You can still learn. Special events, I just put that down because I don't know what they might be. Sometimes things turn out to be special events that you never anticipated they would be. There are so many interesting things to do and places to go, and you never know when you're going to find something really terrific. I've been very blessed. I never in my life, I think, as a young person growing up in Palmer Township, expected to be traveling in Europe or getting to see Paris or all these other things. Those are the things, the special events in my life that have made it so special for me. Another thing that I have learned to be grateful for, perhaps, or when I was thinking of this, made me think of this, the support that we find. And that's sort of what I've been talking about already, but there are so many places where you find people who you maybe don't even know who support you. And it's such a joy. Sometimes you don't see that. Again, New York, two examples opposite. We were coming down stairs, I think, into a subway, and there was a young woman who was trying to make the staircase, and there was a young family, a young man, his wife, I guess, and two children, including a very precious little girl, and they were spread out across the stairs, and the young woman trying to get down into the subway said to the pretty little girl, "Excuse me," and the father let her have what I wouldn't even want to print, blue language. And I thought, this is a man with children, and this is what he does? But yet on the same sort of situation, I was in New York on the subway and had on one of the few good pairs of earrings I have, and as I was getting ready to get off to go to the opera, somebody brushed against me and the earring went down between the car and the platform. And I thought, okay, bye-bye earring. There was a young man who had just gotten on. I may have told some of you this before, and he said, "Get somebody to come and get that. They will do that." And I thought, nah. And he said, "Go, get somebody." So I went and looked, and I didn't know how to do that. So I came back, and the subway hadn't pulled out for some reason. He's still saying, "Get somebody, go get somebody." And so the subway left eventually. Jerry said, "Stand there, and I'll go see what I can do. Stand where the earring is." And I looked down when the subway went out, and it was all black. You know, there was nothing there. We waited. he came back with an official, and she said, well, we don't have anybody here to go now, but come back in a little while, we may have it. So we went to the opera. He came back in a long intermission that existed, and he came back and handed me the earring. And I couldn't believe that the young man had worked so hard to make something of that. We didn't know each other. I couldn't believe it had been found by these people. And I know if I went around here, I could find stories like these all over the place in this room if we thought about it. Sometimes we call it maybe luck, but then what really is luck, and how can it be? Sometimes, another thing that I think about, I remember when I was a little kid, we were driving somewhere on a 2-lane road, and we're going up a hill, and a tractor trailer was coming down, and he was out of control. And there were 3 cars, we were the second, and this tractor trailer is heading at us, and he pulled over to the edge of the road, which was a very narrow shoulder with no guardrail. And he managed to not lose the trailer, and we drove by, and we stopped. All 3 cars stopped at the top and went, sometimes you have things like this where it just almost happened, but it didn't. I think maybe somebody had other plans. Someone was watching. So we call it luck, but maybe it's more. I think it is. And then finally on my list of wonderful things that I enjoy, kind of small, but I sure do love living where we are, being in this area. I love the plants, all times of year. I always am amazed that God is taking all this time to make these cute little animals and deer and all these things that enrich our world, that make it so. Growing apples, for example. It is so wonderful that we are here. There is so much the Lord has given us. And sometimes when things are bad, it's kind of good, I suppose, to stop and take some sort of count of these things. And then finally, the last one on my list of things I think about are decisions that we make in life. And sometimes we make good choices, sometimes we make bad. I'm not sure which one it was that made me say, living at home and with my parents and teaching in the high school from which I graduated is no way to grow old. So first I tried going to the University of Arizona, where I ran out of money very quickly and didn't want to go into debt again because I just got done getting out of debt. And I met some people from New York, and they gave me a whole list of good places in the suburbs to go and teach. So I wrote letters when I got home, and I wound up in Parsippany, New Jersey. And then I decided, since I'm living here, I ought to go to church. And if I go to church, I want to sing in the choir. They had in that church a very small choir, even smaller than ours. I think we had, sometimes I was the soprano, we had about 2 altos, we had 1 tenor, and we had about 3 basses. And one of them was, we got talking. He began bringing things to my apartment, I remember, his color television, his sewing machine. And I thought to myself, now how will I get rid of him if I don't want him? However, it turned out I did want him. And I remember even that, maybe I shouldn't even say this, but his proposal was unusual. I remember it word for word. We were on the phone and we were talking about the house he was going to buy. He was tired of living in an apartment. And I'm telling him, well, I would like this and I wouldn't like that. And I said, but of course I haven't been asked to live there. And he said, you're being asked. And I said, what? He said it a little louder. He meant it. You're being asked. So who knows where the good stuff is going to be? It turned out he's not perfect, but neither am I. And we have a very good relationship, a great life for a long time now, going on our 43rd anniversary. At any rate, I've gotten those things down. Let me see, anything else I should mention? Part of the things that come along, the helpers we find, this church has wonderful helpers, doesn't it? So many things that are done here that are so special. Sometimes just an avoidance of a difficulty is a good thing. And sometimes where you are is good. In other words, overall, there are things we can learn. We can learn negative, we can learn positive. but all the way we have so many good things. And I'd like to end today with something the minister was good enough to find for me, a song called Count Your Blessings, because that's sort of what I'd like us to be doing. I think you have a copy, and Shirley has been good enough to say she would play it for me. And I think it would be very nice if we'd end by singing it so we can start thinking about this more.
All verses?
I don't know. Jerry thinks I should only do 2 verses. What do you think? I hear all. We're doing all.
Now, where was I going to start?
Why don't you watch out for the ending, by the way. You are tried scars. When you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by blessings with the Lord hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. Are you ever burdened with the load of care? Does the cross take every care you call to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. Count your blessings, live them one by one, and make your blessings that the Lord hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. When you look at others with their lands and gold, think that Christ has promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings, there depend on high. You will neither heaven nor your home on high. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend, help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. May you have a wonderful day thinking about blessings.